Johnny Gomez from Webflow, Melissa Mendez is one of the co-organizers and also runs Eureka, and then Michael Yonke and John Eicher are from Unfold, which is like one of the top design firms in like the whole world. So, um, hold up.
I got the limitless dolly action going on.
Listen, we got everything happening here at State of Flow, no lie. So we're about to do a conversation, talk about the state of web design, basically like what does this mean for digital creators to be so close to the development process now that you don't have to learn how to write the code manually, you can do it visually. And so we're going to talk about what that means. Rolling off the table. I mean, they're round things on a table, so probably doesn't need a whole lot of momentum. House. Does anybody have my production crew? Number 5, Mike. I don't know what you're saying. Yeah, there's like the. Oh. Hey man, what's this? Your first time? All right, let's do this. How's everybody doing? We got enough energy? We got some barbecue coming on the way, so this is the last talk between y'all and some good eats. So let's get it started. The sooner we start, the sooner we can grab food. All right, I wanted to remind everyone about those Bing Flow cards, if you still have them. We did get a couple turned in yesterday, but this little box is going to be right here for those. Also, you probably want to be taking a few notes to put down on your letter for me card. This afternoon, in here, we're going to have a couple community breakouts, and then there's going to be like, we'll break out into smaller little things after lunch. But yeah, we'd love to have you guys do that letter to yourself. We got something special planned for that to ship them to you in a future date. We're going to add a little something stuff to that. So make sure you pull that out. Think about like what you might want to set as goals and objectives moving forward. Just wanted to give you a reminder of that, and also the Bing Flow card. So, y'all ready? All right, let's bring the music down. Let's get down. We are about, oh, you know what? Kareem, you ready? Is this live? Hello, internet? Are we live? Okay, so welcome. We're going to talk about state of web design. Yesterday we talked about the state of flow, and we talked a little bit about Webflow. We've kind of been discussing Webflow all up until this. And so Webflow is a very powerful tool for taking designs and putting them onto the web, right? Taking content and building it out in a way that anybody can access it. However, you still need content, right? You still need design. You still need stuff to put into Webflow. You need ideas. You need you need some structure. And a lot of times you got to think about that design before you get to building, right? And planning that design, thinking about what you're going to build, thinking about how you're going to build it, thinking about the content that goes into that design. It's all just as important, if not more important, than how you develop it, right? So we're seeing now you could take maybe a couple different platforms and get pretty close to the end product. But what really matters and what really stands out today in web design is the design part of it, right? Is that emotional connection to the user. It's that experience when you get to the site of like, wow, there's something special happening here, and we have some of the most talented people in the whole space to do just that. So let's start, actually, Johnny and Melissa, because they were on the organizing committee. Johnny is the one responsible for all this beautiful branding, the little marks you're seeing, the designs on the stage, these little stickers, everything you see that's visually designed. Comes out of Johnny's brain. Super talented guy. I met Johnny at Webflow Conf, at No Code Conf in 2019. Been friends ever since. Appreciate the work he does. He just got promoted to staff designer at Webflow. Anyway, let's give it up for Johnny. Melissa, we all know her. Eureka, Flow Party. She is coming onto the Webflow space strong. Also a talented designer, and her aesthetic is not to be challenged in any capacity. And so let's give it up for Melissa. I can't wait to hear what she has to say about all of this. Now, these next two, I don't have much eloquent to say because I am just now meeting them. Right? Other than to know that we have the creative director of web design and the top Webflow developer at Unfold, right? And so what I'm hoping to hear them talk about is how they approach the web design process. How do they kind of take the creative ideas that the design team puts together and then implement that into a website, and then kind of have them go back and forth and discuss. And we're going to do just like we did yesterday, where I'm going to be bouncing around. They're part of the conversation, but so are you. So if you've got a question, if you've got something you want to say, if you've got some ideas about design, if you think they're right, if you think they're wrong, we want to hear about that, right? And same thing in the audience, if you're watching live, we're going to be trying to monitor that as best we can and try to bring some of those questions in as well. So hopefully this just becomes an hour and a half dynamic conversation about the state of web design. So I'm going to leave it, because I didn't give y'all like a super duper introduction, I'm going to leave John Eicher and Michael Yankee to introduce themselves from Unfold and just give us a little, just tell us a little bit about Unfold. I think maybe some of the people are familiar with it, but not all of the work. So we'll start with you, John, and yeah, maybe introduce yourself and Unfold, and then Michael, you can carry on that from there.
Right on. Check, check, check. This is on. My name is John Eicher. Everybody calls me Eicher, so it was weird he just called me John, even though we had this conversation already.
And now we know.
Creative director of web, as you know. Been working at Unfold now going on 2 years, but I can say that just based off of agencies I've worked with in the past, there's just like a different recipe of something that's happening there, and as web changes, as technology changes, I can kind of feel that we're at the forefront of that thing happening. And I can kind of say it sets up kind of where we're going to be talking today, and kind of where Webflow kind of plugs into our process as design.
Can I stop you for a second? Can we just make sure the mics are literally just almost touching your lips? It's going to help with the feedback and the sound for everyone in the crowd.
If it almost touches your chin, that's the great spot to be. Yeah.
Okay. Your turn, Yankee.
Is this on? No. I feel like I'm muted on a Zoom call right now. Hey, Michael, you're on mute. You're on mute. So yeah, I'm Michael Yankee. I do the Webflow development at Unfold from Iker's web design team, and they make my life really hard because they come up with some pretty crazy stuff. And from Indianapolis, and I'm really, really happy to be here. So thank you for the invite. And yeah, looking forward to just talking with you guys. You guys are amazing.
Oh, sorry.
Back to you, Ramon.
I'm sorry.
Back
I just
to
saw my dude Daniel come up on his rolling dolly, and I was like mesmerized by him floating around. Yeah, maybe make a pass. Let the whole world see it. Huh? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how it starts, right? How does the process start from ideation? Like, let's say there's a problem to tackle, right? Design is somehow addressing a problem, right, in the world, structuring the data, making things approachable, making it acceptable to the user. So, like, just let's go down the chain. Like, where do you start? Because that's what I want to know. Like, where do you even start the design process? How do you then start translating that to web? And then I'd like your perspective dealing with clients and then working on the Webflow side, like dealing with high-level design stuff, right? Because we're not talking about little design over here or hey, I did a little Canva thing. Like, we're talking about original, extremely unique, world-class shit. So where does that process start? If you could, I'd like a little bit from anyone, all of you actually.
I could kick this off. So I don't want to bore everybody with the details because design is, intricate and abstract, and there's a lot of nuances that go into it. But kind of the broad strokes of it, I would say, is like the collection of the information that you gather from the client up front is the most valuable portion, going into design. Anybody can design something, make it look good, but do you design it with purpose and intent? And those things are captured right away. Creating those relationships with the clients and kind of stop calling them clients, call them your partners. You're working with someone to help them achieve a goal or a dream, and they come to you with that. They need your help and they need that expertise. So that upfront work that's done not just by the designers and everybody else, but the project management, the sales, like all the things that are communicated up front to make sure that when they come to us, expectations are already being met. Like they know that, Unfold works Monday through Thursday. They get 2 designers to a team. They get a time block. So when all of the logistical things are out of the way and design actually gets to start, there's no question as far as what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. Those things have been figured out. So.
Yeah, I'm not going to be boring with process 1, 2, 3, ABC either, but I will say that one part of the process that I really like that Unfold does is where once we do have all of the content and the logistics figured out and the web team has put together stylescapes and the client has kind of zoned in on where they want, like what direction they want to go. I talked about this yesterday, but the team push where we're starting with the hero and just, sometimes that's really daunting. You can go in so many different directions. Getting the team in there and doing a team push at the beginning of web projects and just having 30 people coming up with an idea, it just is invigorating because when you get stuck, you can look back and just say, wow, I kind of like this too. Then one other thing I'll say about the process from the Webflow side is, and actually Jesse and I think we're talking about this at one point earlier today. I used to, now when I work with the Unfold web design team, they blow my mind, and I do more Webflow than any design now. And I think, one thing about Webflow is when I would design previous to coming to Unfold is I would design for things I knew I could build in Webflow, and I really did not like that. So now I actually try to take an approach, like from a design side when they're going through the site, I try to step back and just be away from it and let them be as creative as possible, and then put it on me to be able to come up with a way to figure that out, as opposed to say, hey, like CMS slider, like we got to go find FinSuite for that, or you can't do that, or every carousel looks the same when you're trying to design one for Webflow. So I try to stay hands off, let them be really creative, and then put it on me to figure out a way to find that solution so we get the best output for design.
Can I stick on Jet just for 1 second? How does that communication happen back and forth then? Like once they just hand you something and you're like, okay, do you then like beat your head against the wall for a minute and then go back and be like, hey, we can't actually build this? Or like what happens after that?
So yeah, there's definitely been times where they know when they're getting really crazy, and they'll come to me and say, is this going to be doable? I'll give you one example. There was an NFT collection that Unfold launched called Dronies. And on that site, there is a cartridge player for different releases of a comic book. And they wanted this cartridge to go into the cartridge player and press play. And I'm just like, that's not the way I would have done this, but I get why they want to do it. And we just built all the interactions from scratch. We ended up making it work, but that's something that if I was designing it, we never would have taken that approach. So it's definitely one of those things where you just kind of let them do their thing, and when they feel like they're getting too crazy, they will ask me. Or before we go into development, I'll make sure I'm looking at everything, see if there's anything that we can't do. And that's kind of the power of Webflow, is a lot of times you can do anything with some of these third-party tools, and using attributes from FinSuite, we talked about that. I use that all the time. So yeah.
For us at Eureka, we follow the same process when we start the project, making sure that all the goals and everything's in place. But what I really love about working on an agency environment is collaboration. We get together all the designers that will be on that project, and we just start throwing ideas, just like a couple concepts, 3-4 concepts. And then from there, we get the client's feedback, and then we can really expand on that. So I think in that process, it's so important to have collaboration within the team, because as you said, there's people with so many crazy ideas, and that's really what sets a project apart. That one component that it's completely different. And that will really not only look different, but will challenge the developers. And then that's another skill you gain. So
2 things. First, disclaimer, this is my answer. I don't know anything, and this is what works for me. So, take all this with a grain of salt. Second, how cool is this shirt? How cool is this shirt? With a finger there, awesome.
And your pants.
Thank you. Cash App in the swag store. So I have different processes. At Webflow specifically, I guess it could be size or scale. I need a brief, I need a kickoff, and I need a lot of things kind of beforehand, because there's just too many stakeholders that need to be aligned, and it's sort of I need that organization. For me, and even if I'm starting to put the state of flow, I don't find the state of flow. The state of flow kind of finds me. So when I was in my first years of college, and I dropped out of college, I guess. But in my first years of college, I would instead of going out, I would just get together with friends to do design-a-thons and just design stuff. And we would get together and just crank stuff and just have fun. And now sometimes I just I try to do that, and I sit on my computer and I'm okay, so what will I design? And then I'm and then I open Facebook, and then I procrastinate, and then I don't do anything. But then it's 2 a.m. and I'm what if I do this? And then even all this stuff here that I made, some stuff was made at 10 a.m., some stuff was made at 4 a.m., some stuff was made at 3 a.m. I don't know. And it's just it's when that state of flow found me.
Yeah, I love that. Any thoughts, questions so far? I want to give a couple shout outs here because we didn't do this yesterday in the comments and the YouTube stuff. So shout out to Zach Bujazia, who's in the crowd, Blur, Colleen's here, Isaac, Scott Humphrey, and they're loving the conversation here about design. So I want to carry on this process stuff. Where do you go, Johnny? When the State of Flow finds you, like, do you do anything specific? Is there music? Do you design in silence? Do you like have any kind of inspiration? And we'll just come back across the board here. Like, are there certain things that you go, because we talked about yesterday the science of flow and kind of finding that state. Is there something specific you do to trigger some of that? You know, any routines before you get into that design to help you get there?
So music is a key part of my process. Usually when I'm designing is music with no lyrics. Lyrics tend to distract me, so it's usually either, you can find me listening to classic music, you can find me listening to techno music, usually more techno than anything else. And I don't know if anybody knows Jay Dilla, you know, hip hop bases, instrumental, no lyrics, that's like how I get there. And besides that, I like designing at night. Everybody's asleep, the world is asleep, silence, it's when I can focus. And besides, you know, like, I am lucky to work at a company that I don't need to put my 9 to 5. I can find my process. I can find my best way to work. And I know that not everybody has that opportunity. So, you know, I do most of my stuff and most of my collaborative stuff in the morning. And then at night, it's just like when I roll. I just like grab my laptop and I'm in there with my music. And it's just like, again, just like, you know, state of flow, I guess.
Yeah, for me, I think as soon as I start a project, I already know in my head the style it's going to have, and immediately I identify the song that goes with it. So throughout the project, I will keep listening to it, and it'll inspire me to create more based on the sounds or the lyrics or just the vibe of it. Yeah. And yeah, I think also at night, that's my thing too.
It's amazing how similar that is in the video process. Like when you find the music, the video edits itself. So anybody out there who's playing with video, if you're like struggling to try to edit something, go find the song that you think sets the tone. And I think it falls right into that because it puts you into that mindset where you're like, oh, okay, it's fast paced. Or, oh, this is a little slow, it's a little more classical, it's a little more polished, it's a little more whatever. So yeah, Michael, follow on with any kind of inspiration.
Yeah, definitely the music thing. And I'll just give a shout out. If you have a song that you like to Webflow to, she created a playlist. Go put it in there. I think it'll be cool on Monday whenever everybody gets back to work to just kind of see what everybody listens to as they work. And then two, I think I try to mute everything that's coming in. So kind of a focus mode on my phone, try to, all the channels that are always going off in Slack, you know, mute the ones that you don't need to hear from right away. And then also, I like the nighttime thing, but I think the thing that's a little bit different is I like everything around me to be really clean or all of, oh my God, yes. Like I need to clean my desk. Like there can't be a dish in the sink. Like everything needs to be clean around me. So I feel like I did all of these tasks and now this is the only thing on my mind and that's what I'm going to attack until I'm done with it. So maybe that's a little different, but I like that.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off of the music. I mean, there's always some for record playing in the background, and I don't know. Lyrics can distract me, yes, but usually I need to have something background because I feel like my thoughts are always racing, and I always have a billion ideas for something that's about to happen. And if I'm listening to metal or I'm listening to something that's a little bit more chaotic, it like calms those for me. So I feel like we're all kind of engineered a little bit differently and kind of all process that differently as well. But the other part of that, so when I'm not designing but I'm more directing, how creativity flows that way is like different. It's a different approach where maybe I'm not listening to music. I'm trying to help one of the designers. Shout out to Alex Ben. Couldn't make it here right now, but super talented. Rarely actually need my help for anything. But there's moments where they're going through creative block and it's kind of, you know, my duty to help break that barrier down for them. So in those moments, it's crazy just how some simple conversations and questions can kind of help move that ball forward. And it's just, sometimes it's just like rotating a picture and next thing you know, they're like, oh, I got an idea. And then as soon as they start to run with those ideas, that's how I know I've kind of done my part.
Iker, I want to stay with you because you manage the design team, right? So you're like, you were telling me last night that you're looking for designers that design better than you, and that's how you're like, okay, you can be on the team. And so let's talk a little bit about managing the design process, right? So now we understand how you guys get into, we talked about state of flow, how you guys get creative. We talked a little bit about that. So let's talk about managing the design process, and it's a little different because Iker's managing the designers. Michael, you're kind of taking their work and putting it onto the web. Melissa, you're inspiring with community, but also building a little agency. And Johnny, I don't know what this transition into staff designer is, but like maybe you can talk about how you manage design. So I'd like to just think a little bit about how you manage that design process, whether that's delegating the work to people, whether it's managing a team, whether it's taking those designs and putting them onto the web. What does that mean for you to manage that design process or to have some kind of flow creatively, executing on those design principles?
Yeah, I mean, we have, obviously everybody has a process, but when I started with Unfold, the web department hadn't been fully fleshed out yet, and it was kind of on me to kind of help determine what are the courses of action we want to take in order to get to successful metrics for this client. And it started, with just a few of us kind of thinking through what the process currently is as it's not documented, and then creating something that's a little bit more structured, that's not meant to be rigid and non-flexible. Every client's different. They require a different process, and they require a different attention. But that process is there to help remove some of the anxiety and stress that comes with managing a project at all. And every single one of the designers at Unfold do a little bit of project management as a lead on a project. So there are a ton of moving pieces, but what the process helps us do is kind of know, like rather than juggling the 3 balls in the air to try to figure out what we're going to do next, just throw one back and forth because we know what the next step's going to be based off of this kind of fluid process. So I keep talking about it as like a fluid thing, but we do try to to boil it down to its basic components. Is you have your discovery / strategy phase that's happening that I talked about being like, we can't start without that upfront discovery. And then we move into kind of iteration / planning, and we'll do like a very loose timeline because how we set up our projects is clients don't purchase an end product or deliverable from us, they purchase our time. So they come to us with a problem, we kind of diagnose what that problem is a little bit more clearly for them and give them a solution. And before we even start the work, we make sure that we're all in agreement that this is the goal that we're going to be moving towards. So that process can flex and change based off of how much time is going to be in this project that we're doing, how many different departments it's going to touch, because oftentimes what will happen is a client will come in, they'll start in brand, and then they'll move into web, and then they'll move into product. And kind of where it gets tricky is there is slightly different processes between those departments, but we've kind of, over the past couple of months, we've had some things put in place to help us kind of communicate between the departments to be able to a little bit more clearly transition and reduce the friction, because at the end of the day, that's what process should be doing, is reducing friction so that you can focus on what's most important, and that is designing for your client's users. I don't know. I feel like I talked in circles there.
Yeah, Michael, I'd be interested to how do you carry on from that, right? So they do their thing, they get to that point. Are you involved in that at that point yet? When do you get involved, and then how do you handle that transition to go into your phase where you're building what they've designed?
Yeah, I mean, again, I like to stay hands-off while they're doing the design process, so they can I don't want to be stifling with what we can do in Webflow. I want them to just be as creative as possible and get really crazy. Right now we're working on a Creative South website that has, I think, 125 elements in the hero. It's they hate me. But yeah, I do come in sometimes. So when they have questions, I'll obviously come in and answer. I'll always pop in the Figma file and make sure nothing's getting like I'm not sure what we're going to do here yet. Do we have any other options? But I think there's, I'm not doing any management at Unfold, but there is some direction, from the beginning when we're working with Iker And Alex and Benton from the web team, for example, is just, when they're building their Figma files, we're building a desktop at 1440, and it's just a reminder of, what does that look like on a 2400 screen? Is that illustration, is that going to fade out? Do I need to fade that out with a mask in Webflow somehow? Or are you going to fade out that illustration? Where do we want to stop your design at? Do we want to stop scaling at 1700 if we're using, shout out to Joe, fluid responsive maybe? So it's some of those subtle reminders of just making sure all of the global styles are matching up, do the illustrations work across all of the different breakpoints, and that's something that you can say it once and, they're unbelievable. The next time you won't have that problem. So there's not a lot from my end on them, managing the process. I kind of manage myself, I guess.
Can I ask a question? Awesome. Do you kick off the project right after they're done, or are you kind of like involved in the first kickoff for the whole thing?
So I'll usually be on the kickoff calls with the client, and it really depends on what timeline we're providing to the client or what the client needs. For example, the last project I was working on, once they finished the homepage and we got sign off, they already established all of the global styles. Then I started doing the homepage, and then I just followed behind them. There are other times where I'm finishing up another project, so they're working on the design, and then they'll pass it over to me, and that's how the timeline works out. So it's really different, but I will say that, and this is just one way that I like to work, is Unfold usually allows me to work on just one project at a time, which is something I really like. I don't like to, switch from Figma file to Figma file, talk to this designer, then this designer. It's just a really open line of communication, one way or two ways, just to get this one project done. And I think that keeps me kind of in the zone and just attacking the problem and get it done quicker.
Yeah, for us, it's basically the same process. So designer and developer is involved in the kickoff, and I'm very involved in design if we're doing the design for the client. So I want to make sure that we're following all of the goals that the client needs, and as we go through feedback, if I see that maybe they're not pushing themselves too much, then I can go in and suggest, okay, maybe try this, or let's go this route. Yeah, so it's basically the same thing.
Well, I design and develop. I do both things. The only thing that we don't do at Webflow is QA. I try to QA as I go, but then QA is assigned to somebody else, another web designer in the team that can kind of like, has another perspective, has like fresher eyes, some things I will not notice until somebody points it out, and then I'm like, why didn't I see that? When it comes to management, like I don't want to be a manager. I don't want to be kind of like in charge of that whole process. I think I'm a great IC. An individual contributor is that tech slang. But I don't want to tell somebody what to do with their time. I don't want to be a people manager. I believe in collaboration. I believe in candor with care. I believe in providing valuable feedback to the people in my team. But knowing when I have to step away and let them work, because if you start to get too attached and start to fall in love with design, with those designs, and then you see somebody working and you're like, I wouldn't do it that way, but then you need to step aside. You need to let that sort of design diversity happen, because if not, everything will kind of be the same, and I am not the Webflow brand, and I know that, and not any designer is a Webflow brand. It's sort of it's the result. It's the addition of all those parts that and I'm not saying that the brand is only that, but it's the addition of all this collaboration and all these different point of views that make this so much richer, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy. Y'all can just bounce it forward. I don't have to ask the questions. I'm happy to have y'all just jump in and.
I wanted to say something.
Oh, go ahead.
I actually think that that's great, and I love, for example, assigning projects based on the style of that person, because I know that's where they're going to shine, and they're going to love doing that project. So that's all. That's all I wanted to say.
I was just going to ask, since you're designing and developing, I was just curious if you ever feel stifled on the design side because you are trying to design something that you know has to work in Webflow. And so sometimes you take a step back and you're like, I'm going to go the path that is the easiest way to do this in Webflow. So that's kind of my first question. Then two is just with, being the designer for Webflow and developer for actual Webflow, maybe you guys aren't allowed to use, this random thing you found on GitHub to do something. So do you ever feel kind of held back by, only being able to use certain tools that Webflow will use because of the scale that they're at right now?
So for that first question, I struggled with that a lot in the beginning. Like I'm designing something, and then I think the term is like shooting yourself in the foot. Where you're like, what am I doing? I will be implementing this. There's a current project that I'm working on that I almost kind of like went off the rails in a way and started making something, and the whole time thinking like, I will have to figure this out. And it was one of the proposals that I had for this website, and everybody loved that one. And people were like commenting on that specific element, like on that component, like, whoa, this is so awesome! Like, I can't wait to see this build. And I'm like, and hopefully, I'm self-taught. Everything is in the internet. Everything is out there. There's a very strong Webflow community, a very strong FinSuite community, and there's like all these other resources that have helped me to actually get that to where I want. And I also, I can't say that I do this alone. I don't know if are we live right now? Special shout out to Corey Moen. I don't know if he's watching right now, but he is light of knowledge, and he brings like so much to the team. And if I can't think of a solution, I go to him, and we kind of like bounce ideas off each other, and we get to that point. On your second question, sometimes yes. Sometimes I try to do as much as I can in Webflow, and I'm seeing like Tyler, for example. He's doing a lot of GSAP. A lot of like interactions that are like outside of Webflow, and I can't tell you how much like I almost like praise you for doing that, because it's something that most of my time I'm just like trying to do everything in Webflow. And I know that that's a right tool for the right project, and like I feel like lately we have been exploring more like outside of what Webflow offers to think about the end customer and think about like that final result. And that comes with whether it is extensions, whether it is plugins, whether it is just like pre-built components. I work at a company that we're at a size where we have to talk to the security team. There's like possibilities of breaches. You just like even Chrome extensions. I used to add any Chrome extension, give them all permissions. I don't care. Nothing like why do I care about somebody knowing what I'm doing if they're gonna provide better results? And it doesn't work like that when you work at a company this large. So I need to have these sort of like guardrails, and then I just move myself within that.
Cool, yeah, and I'll add on that, even at Unfold, we try to do everything Webflow native, because if we're going to hand it off to a client and, we're pulling in something third party, I don't know if that's going to be supported for a long time, or if it's going to work on the next browser update, and, they're not going to know what to do if that carousel that you can swipe that isn't native in Webflow doesn't work anymore. So that's something that we try to do too, is stick all native to Webflow. But what if we don't? We always try to go with something like FinSuite, where we know they're committed to this community for the long term. And so, yeah.
I think it's interesting how there's this designer that I really like, designer, creative director called Nicola Miranda. He's from Italy. His work is awesome. And most of his interactions are GSAP and 3JS. But then I think it was Ilya, who grabbed he just recreated in Webflow something that was almost completely built in code. And I think sometimes you see an interaction, or you see a website, and you think whoa, how did they do this? I'm a big fan of inspecting, opening the code, seeing everything. And I think sometimes you just need to break an interaction down to the simplest element and then go logically step by step. And I guess the end result might be an interaction of let's say 4 seconds looped with literally 150 steps. And you see that, and it's kind of like, it's sort of this like structured chaos, you know? That it's like, it's very complex, but at the end of the day, it's about the final result, and it looks amazing.
Yeah. I would love to give the mic to Ty because we've been playing a lot with GSAP and Locomotive and stuff like that, and we do it because we're trying to find extra solutions for things that we want to do. So would love to hear his POV.
Johnny, by the way, Corey was watching, and he said, "Boo."
Yeah, when it comes to working outside of native Webflow interactions, the best way that we've found to do that is to work backwards. So when you're deving inside of Webflow with your divs, like the clonable I just put out, it has a really cool frame that when you open a mega menu, that frame just cuts down. And then the opacity of the background goes to like 70%. So when I was building that, I would start with that frame squeezed down at 70%. And then when I'm adding the interactions in GSAP, I just work backwards. And it's a much faster way because you set the end state. So you know exactly what your interaction is going to look like at the end, which makes it much easier just to backtrack and go to the original state. Yeah, and with experimenting outside of native Webflow interactions, you learn things that go beyond Webflow native. So when a client asks for something and you know you can make it happen, and maybe it's even quicker than using native Webflow interactions, you're able to say yes confidently. And that's something that this recent clonable is helping Eureka do. We learned a lot building it out.
Yeah. So one of the solutions, for example, that GSAP is giving us is speed for project animations. So instead of we could use a class animation, but with GSAP, it's even faster. So we've just found different ways to do things, and it just works for us.
Yeah, and when it comes to performance too, we found in some cases using GSAP instead of Webflow native actually results in a better performance on mobile, desktop, slower internet. So there's a ton of benefits to knowing this, but there's also a ton of benefits to just sticking to native Webflow interactions.
Yeah, I think just mixing both of them is great, you know?
Let's cut the whole thing of like either code or no code, you know? Code, low code, no code, it's the best tool for the project, you know?
Yeah, and I would encourage, if you're playing or learning Webflow, like learn those first. Learn all the Webflow interactions, push them to their limits, figure out what, like when you go to a crazy level and scroll jack everything and you got all these move interactions, or when scrolling into view, or, you know, like just push that all to the limits and then try it on all the different browsers and learn and explore. And I know that's how some people break out. Like that's how y'all found each other, right? Doing clonables, next thing you know, you connect. When I started in this space, I started with clonables. FinSuite's entire marketing history is essentially just giving stuff away to the community. And so this is how you learn. Like a lot of times you take that and you push. And Johnny, I like what you said about being self-taught, right? Because that is, and probably I think if we went through the group here, everyone in here has that little bit of resourcefulness, right? They're just like face a problem and they're not just like, well, I guess there's a problem. It's like, nope, you just, and you find the answer, or maybe you find something close to the answer and you start experimenting. So let's talk about that as it iterates in the design process, right? Because design is a lot of iteration. We talked yesterday about, you know, how many sketches is too many, and you got to curate that experience, so you limit. So let's jump into that just a little bit. When you're going through that, how many iterations? How do you evolve the design? Like, have you ever gotten to a place where you're like, this is great and everything's amazing, and then you get like into the process and you build it halfway and you're like, oh, it's actually got to go this way, and then everything changes. So can you talk a little bit about how you kind of work through that? And I'd like to start with Johnny, actually, maybe even some of the state of flow stuff, because there's been so much shift, like conceptualizing and thinking and just changing on the fly. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how you all handle that.
So maybe not 100, but I do 100 things. I just show 3. Sometimes I even show 1 because I'm very confident. And again, it's not like, you know, like, here's the logo, let me know, or here's the thing, let me know. Present it. Explain your decisions. You know, show why you did what you did. And that might be the differential for a client saying like, I don't know. We're like, okay, I get it now. Yeah, I love it. So, and specifically for iteration, my files are a mess. Layers and naming, amazing. I'm really good at that. I like to name all my layers and have everything organized, but then you need to zoom out in the Figma file and it's a mess. And what I do, I start designing a website and go I usually start above the fold, and I do a bunch of above the folds, and that kind of gives me, the sense of how it's gonna look under that. And then what I do, I continue going down, and then I think of a component, and then I hold command, put it to the side, again, and again, and again. And I have 10 variations of every component pretty much. And then it's almost like I'm building all my blocks, and then I just stitch them together. I'm okay, it's working better here, maybe not here. And then I my iteration is almost very granular. I have a little card component, I do 20 of those. And I would not show the client the 20 of those. I have in the past opened the whole file, let me know what you like, dangerous game. So I do these 20 variations, and then I cut it down to 10. Then I share with a handful of people. Then I bring that down to 2 options. Then I share it with a little bit more people. And then eventually when I'm presenting my recommendation is this whole layout.
The fact that you name your layers, somebody needs to just name a day after you. That is, yeah. I need that when I get into Figma, and sometimes it's like that, sometimes it's not, but it's really helpful.
You need to empathize. If I think about the state of web design today is collaborative. Figma enable that. There's a lot of multiplayer things that let you kind of collaborate more. Remote work. Somebody else will open that file, and they will be especially today with auto layout. That you're kind of dragging something and everything is kind of scrambling in the side. I like to provide that sort of guidance to people that they know what they're clicking on.
I kind of want to challenge it a little bit here.
Challenge.
So I feel the saying, different strokes for different folks. Everybody operates a little bit differently. Trying to maintain layer names when you have 30 other people also providing concepts, it's an impossible task. But if you want to do it for us, you're more than welcome. I'm kind of thinking back to what you were originally saying about how you present concepts at a time. And I think they did this before I was there, and this is something that I've adopted and felt awkward and strange at first, but kind of Figma unlocked this ability to not just have multiple designers in a file to iterate and conceptualize and do all that stuff, but it also gave us a way for the clients to feel like they are part of the process. And I remember the first time that we did I won't even call it a design reveal because it was more of a check-in. And that's kind of how our processes have changed to allow that to be that way, is these check-ins happen a little bit more frequently, and they're a little bit more collaborative with the clients in the early stages of the project. So thinking the stylescape, thinking the wireframes, all of the things that are channeling a direction, and you're trying to narrow in. And we found that when we have the clients involved in those decision-making opportunities up front, they start to peel back as you get deeper into the process. So they understand the direction that we're taking, and that's where the education and us using our expertise to explain things in the moment, we kind of like it when they pick stuff that we don't like, because it's our opportunity to talk about things like accessibility or to explain why, okay, so this is controversial. The subjective versus objective in design. A lot of us are subjective when we look at design. We have preferences. We want things that we like. Well, some of us like purple. I won't get too far into that. But some of us don't. I think what we try to do is, by having so many different opinions and different ideas in that process, we're allowed to take that time to educate both the client, but also take time to help empathize with them, let them know that the goal that we're trying to achieve is usability of their product for their user. And sometimes, you know, people are very, they expect a thing, and if they're higher up in the chain of command, they want a thing that's going to reflect their company in a way that exudes their personality, which, you know, those are awkward conversations to have with the client, and saying, it's not about you, it's not about me, it doesn't matter what I like, doesn't matter what you like. What matters is what your personas, the people that are going to be using your product like. So using that as a frame of reference while collaborating through those early stages makes it so that when we get to that refined product and we put like 2-3 options up, there's no like pushback from the client. Can we see a fourth option? Or can we, like, they're usually like, we love option 2. And like the approval rate from that process has like been night and day difference from like the stressful nights before trying to put together the perfect, you're spending 16 hours putting together a presentation, and you show it to the client, they're like, or they're like, we love it, and then you get an email, you know, 3 hours later, like, what are you guys doing? I feel like we're really off track. I don't really like this. So this kind of removes that like shock and awe that comes from presentations as a whole. And I didn't realize that it was happening at first, but I started to recognize that there's a lot more comfort. And it's kind of like the whole mental health game that's also involved in creative landscape, which is to be creative all the time and have to produce like award-winning designs. And like, it's a lot of stress, it's a lot of pressure under anybody to know that they have to make those decisions. But removing those like high stress moments from the equation kind of allows it to balance itself out a little bit. So there's 2 awkward things that happen when you present like a big grand reveal of like you went 3 months and yeah, there's communications or something going on, but you just dropped this design in front of them that they spent, I don't know, $20,000 on. Who knows what the price of that was, and they don't like it. And like, that's incredibly awkward for them and the shoes that they're sitting in, to just like, they don't want to just like discredit all the hard work that you've done, but they're also like upset. And on the flip side, that designer is sweating bullets thinking about all the things that had just happened. And I've been in those situations, and they're terrifying. I mean, I'm not a public speaker. I don't like doing presentations. And this has kind of, it just, I feel like I'm happier. Like ever since we switched over to that. And I think a lot of the designers can kind of, you know, like at Unfold can, you know, speak to the same thing of like, we don't have that like burden of that anticipation of the grand reveal, and are they gonna hate it, are they gonna like it? It's just kind of like a slow burn that works up to an approved product that everybody's happy with at the end.
Can I ask, just, I want to follow up on that, because we talked a little bit about design, and I want to know, like, first of all, how do you separate good versus bad design? Right? Because lots of people out there are calling themselves designers and like, yeah, we're, you know, creative, blah, blah, whatever, you know, and then there's like y'all who are really doing like world-class design. So what separates that, right? Like, what is good design, and how do you, like, Johnny, you said something about like selling or like presenting the work, right? And I think that's part of it, the story of why you solved the solutions or why you did things a certain way. So can you tell me a little bit about what makes good design as you carry forward from that, like presenting that? You're saying it's not a big reveal, but like, how do you know when you're at that phase where like, this is good or it's not, or this is world-class or it's not? Like, how does that happen?
Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so just to reiterate what Yankee has kind of praised already is like, we've got like 35 incredible designers at our agency, and they're all like, they can design circles around me, and like it's hard to put things in our public or our Slack channels for feedback. We call it Feedbash, and we use that like every day. But we're posting screenshots of sections and logos and concepts and ideas in there. But it's like, the feedback that we get from our team is never like that's awful, that's terrible. It's like, hey, that color doesn't work and this is why. And like, there's always like an empathetic hand behind all of the feedback that's provided there. But in, you know, jumping back to, we have all these incredible designers, there's just so much like positive feedback that comes back, so that when you are on the right track, you know you're doing good. But you also have to use that frame of reference of what is the goal for that project, the logo, the landing page, the website. And if the feedback that you're getting is pushing you away from that goal, then it's your responsibility as a designer to not just recognize that that's happening, but to speak up. Because going back to subjective versus objective, you're not always going to design something that you yourself like and love, because as a designer, you're not necessarily an artist. And it's not your job to create an expression of self for the client's users. It's your job to create a frictionless experience so that they can, buy medicine to help their family, to, I don't know, buy a car for their teenage boy that's about to get his driver's license. Like, that's our responsibility, is to make sure that those processes are frictionless, easy to use. And like, that's how, as designers, we can make an impact in the lives around us, is like being able to like take this crazy, stupid design that the design team came up with, and Yankee over here is like, hey, we can't do that stupid thing you just told us to do, but clean it up and create a web experience that allows that goal to be achieved. And that's like, that's what we're here for. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I definitely think that good design, I mean, you have to take into consideration the goal that you're going after. I mean, the most beautiful, nicest, smoothest interactions might get the most dribble likes, as an example, but it might not convert the most people on an insurance website. So that's just something you got to take into consideration.
So the definition for good design changes based on the goals.
I think so.
That, and then also the more I see design, the more feedback I get. I think design is just like building blocks, and it just works the same as Webflow. It's just a combination of things: good alignment, layout, colors, typography, textures. Everything really works together. And that's where you can really see what good and bad design is. If you show me a website that has crazy alignment, everything's not cohesive, that's bad design. But when you're adhering to your, maybe not your style, but that framework you decided, and that makes sense, then that is a good design in my eyes.
I don't know if there's good and bad design. It's like good for what or bad for what. A logo could be, I don't know, not appropriate for Uber, but then it could be super appropriate for some other brand. Like, who's your audience? Who are you talking to? It might not be good for, like, let's say Comic Sans, for example. I have no issues with Comic Sans, but Comic Sans, if you use it in your client's website, I don't know if it's the right decision. If you use it in, like, if you're creating a meme and you want to use it and people will laugh about it, then that's great design, because it's almost like fulfilling its purpose. And that's where I feel like, good or bad design. Even with Iker, before we were talking about David Carson. If anybody here knows David Carson, like, he's like very, I don't know, like, he like breaks all the rules. All the design rules are being broken. Even further. Like, he was like a creative director for a magazine. You would open that magazine, like, paragraphs would have like the line height would be like 0.6. So like you wouldn't be able to read that. It was like tilted. It was like unbalanced. But that's his style. It's like his like grunge garage style. So in that realm, great design. Even like in the history of design, he's almost like like one of the he's like famous for that. But then again, like if you think about functionality, and if you think about like what if the audience for this magazine is seniors and people that like need larger font sizes, or just like more like think about like legibility and readability, and then his design for that use case is just like not good design. So I think it's very kind of like on a case by case scenario.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, I don't know if the name is framework, but if that is your style, then that's fine. Like that works for you. You know, a fashion editorial will not work for a lawyer's office website, but they both have their own thing.
Yeah, maybe we can carry on because I'd like to shift into like good or bad design. Now we have AI doing designs, and right, like there's all this buzz about like Mid-Journey and some of these other tools, DALL-E or whatever. And so now you even have machines creating AI on direction. AI creating designs based on like creative direction. And so I'd like your thoughts on how the state of web design might evolve. Like let's shift the conversation a little future looking here. Like how does this evolve over the next few years as the tooling gets better, as the browsers get better, as they become more powerful, as like people build all these other things and like AI starts solving some of the problems that maybe we solve creatively. Like how do you see that impacting, whether it's the designing the process, is the AI gonna take the design and you just snap a finger and now it's a website? Or like how do you, like do you see any of that? Like does that, like are there thoughts in your mind creatively about how that impacts your business in the next couple years?
It impacts everything, but there's fundamental things to remember about AI, and using it as a tool, using it as like a knife. You can be a surgeon with AI because you can do some things more quickly, more powerfully, and that's what we all want to do at the end of the day: is work smarter, not harder. That's why Webflow has become such a big tool, and that's why it's rapidly being adopted, is because it's using some things that are kind of geared towards that AI realm to help take care of the things that we already know exist and get done every time. But at the end of the day, you got to remember that an AI is artificial intelligence, and they're not creating something for other artificial intelligence. They're creating something for humans. So every step of the way, there's going to have to be a human-centric decision to be made in that process. So I don't foresee it hurting the industry. I see it bolstering and improving the process. It may make the ramp up for people to do these things easier, and I don't look at it as a negative thing. And I'm mostly curious to see how it will continue to evolve in terms of like data recording and seeing like practical use case of websites, and if it can like eventually take the structure of a site and shift it based off of how the traffic is coming to the site, what pages people are going to. Will it reprioritize content? I don't know. It could get crazy like that, but that's just kind of, we're just dipping our toes in those types of technologies now. Curious what y'all think.
Gosh, we're talking about AI. It's crazy to think about where we started, because I think it was in the 70s you could only use a computer if you could use a command line. And in the 80s we had Apple and IBM Apple and Microsoft create operating systems. And in the 90s we had programs come out like Photoshop to be able to use that interface better. And then WordPress came out in the early 2000s, and you could use a few different templates and you could make a site. And now we have no-code tools, building completely custom websites. Then we have things like Wiz that are, you're building custom apps. And now we're talking about AI taking away, doing all the things that we're learning right now. But I do think, just like Iker said, is that it's going to be used as a tool. And one of the coolest tools that I just saw recently that uses AI was just shared in our Unfold Slack, I think by Benton, I could be wrong. But I think it's runwayml.com. And it's basically you enter text prompts to create videos. And so the example that I saw was you type in import a city, and it brings in a city, a video city, just like maybe a 10-second thing. And then it'll say, then you type in slowly fade into this city, and then it starts fading in. It's creating this timeline for you. And then you'll say import this person, and it'll bring in a random person. You'll say delete the background from the person, and they have this person walking across the street in a city that's slowly fading in. And that was a tool for somebody to create something really, really cool. But yeah, to Iger's point, I do think it's going to be a tool and not completely take over things. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Famous last words. before
I'm going to be out of a job.
Before Skynet comes and just does everything. Well, let's say you have thoughts, and Johnny for sure.
I love that. idea you had, like more data. I'm really interested in seeing how we can optimize, the experience of a user once they get into a site. So that would be really cool, and that sounds amazing. I saw it on Twitter but didn't pay attention. I guess I'm a little old school like that, so would love to hear you.
I actually shared that video yesterday because people are saying, AI won't replace designers, of course, and they almost like post examples like this is why they won't replace designers. But every new app or software that comes out, I'm like, wow. Like I shared that video yesterday, and it was like literally like make this more cinematic, remove this light, and then like select light, and they were like selecting this like light in the video, boom, removed. And after sharing that, I got this like ad for like AI generated teachers that is like for companies onboarding. You choose your person, you put your words, and they say it. I'm like, okay, like another thing like this, and like. Now there's, I think, I don't know the exact term. I think it's like stable diffusion or something like that. They kind of like, it fills in an image. So like they grab like an image like the Mona Lisa, and then with AI, they just like generate, like the world. And you can just like extend paintings. And it's just like, like the actual artist never thought about that, but there's AI now actually doing that. And I don't know, like, I know there's like GP3. I've seen like, plugins in Figma. They're like, create a, like, give me a blue button with border radius. And then like once you do that, it kind of like shows up there. I feel like we will get to a point at some point where it's like, like it will be almost like productized, and at some point it will be almost like groundbreaking the way that it is now for design specifically. The thing I think is that it's still artificial. And artificialness doesn't have the human experience, the human, like touch. It doesn't have tact, smell, taste, and that's where I think is like the human differential in a way.
Yeah. I feel like this is like the 90s when the packaged food came out. Like you just pop it in the microwave, eat it, that's it, fast, okay, go. I feel like this is the same thing. Like it doesn't have that originality, rougher on the edges a little bit. I like it, but it's kind of...
No, I want a Lunchable, though. Yeah, there's definitely detractors like you're talking about, because there's this another tool, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, where, actually, people are always marketing to us. We get emails, we're getting ads on Instagram, TikTok, now I'm getting SMS text messages from things I don't even know how they got my number. And then I saw this tool the other day, and it kind of ticked me off, because basically what it does is you record a video of you saying, this prompt, and it uses your video, and then it uses your voice, and you type in what you want to say, and then you put in your email list, and you basically send this video, and it pulls in all of the company names, what that person's name is that you're sending it to, and it looks like it's just a one-on-one video that you created for this person. And at least the videos that I saw, it was indistinguishable from a real person. And I would absolutely hate that if I started getting videos that I thought were to me, and they really just took them 40 seconds to send out 4,000 of them. So I would hate that impersonalization of it.
And to what you said about like the prompts, you start to get like really granular with prompts, and like comma, Blender style, comma, cinematic, comma, 80s. And even like when I was working for one of the slides here, for the state of web design, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna put a prompt here and put like, what would the computer look if it was set in the 60s in a Stanley Kubrick movie? What would a futuristic computer look like? And then it gave me this sort of like old school computer, kind of like contraption, like super huge CPU. And it was like, like once you start to understand the prompts and start playing with it, the first couple of results are going to be kind of like, okay, don't stop there. Keep putting prompts there. And there's this thing that they say like, your kids will have jobs that don't even exist now. I know already that there's like companies hiring like input people. That they know like what are the exact terms to get like the best results, which is kind of scary. And it's like, the role of that person is only doing that and knowing those technicalities. And now there's even services that they sell prompts. Like, what do you need? And there's like a library of a bunch of things, and you can just like select, like, kind of like, filter and choose different things. And it will give you like, this is a string that you need to paste in DALL-E or Midjourney.
That's wild.
And then again, like one other use case that I think it has, mood boarding and stylescaping. Put things that you are like, like those like almost like keywords that you're thinking about, or like the brand pillars. Put those in there and start playing with colors and styles, and you can get like a super awesome kind of like stylescape.
See, but that I would love. Like, that is a great idea, And what you were saying, isn't that like, I think that's like regression. Like, you actually have to train your model for AI to perform better. So basically, that job would be a trainer of AI. So wild.
We're all going to be training the AIs. I think that's all that's happening right now. Okay, yeah, all the data ingestion, right, is all going into the AIs. I want to open it up from here, spend the last 15, 20 minutes questions. We got a few from the online audience, but I'd like to see anybody in the crowd got something they want to ask the panel here.
First of all, thank you guys. This was amazing. I think the AI kind of was a good little bow on top of everything. It's going to be a little bit of a controversial question, and it pains me to ask this in a room full of designers, being a designer myself. But it's kind of something that I've been trying to find an answer to, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it. I think especially when it comes to web design, design has been commoditized or can be commoditized, and in certain use cases can even be arbitrary. So how do you guys, I guess, balance that from, you mentioned an insurance website isn't the same as an NFT website, for example. And when looking at you guys' Dribbble page, I love it. But if I showed it to my mom, she'd be like, I don't know what I'm looking at here. So how do you balance kind of designing for other designers and actually designing for the end user?
I'll take this one. First of all, don't design for other designers. We're an intricate bunch of individuals that all have different opinions, all see things in extremely different lights. And unless you're designing the next Dribbble or Behance or whatever it is, stay away from it. Unless you're doing it for fun, like on the side. Like, I'm not an illustrator, but you'll see the last like 10 posts on Dribbble are illustrations.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. And
He
super
really
good
is.
at it.
It's not on my resume. It won't ever be there. That's because I only do it for fun, and I don't want to do it for anything else. So that's like my little art thing, and I would say maybe that's kind of for other designers. But you had another question in there. It was about like how do you keep it from feeling commoditized or productized? So yeah.
There's standardized websites, e-commerce kind of stuff, and they're doing millions of dollars a month, and they don't need fancy animations or fancy interactions, and probably something that Josh built up there in 20 minutes would do the job for them. So how do you figure out the use cases where, yeah, I think design here is going to help the client and is actually going to make the experience better, and what are the ones where, you guys don't really need crazy design? I think if we keep this very plain and straight to the point, it's going to be better for your business. You can keep the cost down because not everybody needs the next great design website.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you something? Is good design design that converts and that brings profit to the company, or is good design stuff that looks great? And I think that that's the point. Like when you talk about like bad or good design, like it could be bad or good, but then, and I guess to counter to your point, I do design for designers. I'm in that situation
Yes.
where I'm like
Yes, you
designing
do.
sites that designers will see. So
Sorry.
I need to find that balance of like, little kind of like things that designers will like. And at the same time, I need to think about conversion. And I need to think about, like at the end of the day, it's metrics. And how many people are actually, I don't know, seeing the site that I made and like, you know what, I'm going to try Webflow out, and then they convert. And for insurance or for other companies. It's just, it might be different because that is not the audience. And it's difficult designing for designers. I know that for every site that comes out, there's gonna be a lot of props, and there's gonna be a lot of like, why did they do this? Or like, what is this? And I'm like, you know, it's just like, it's challenging to design for designers, I think.
Okay, actually got a question from the audience here. So Nicola Talita asked, when the development starts on Webflow, do you release one page at a time or all at once? And then Andrea's asking kind of, and this could probably go the same way, how do you guys involve the client through the process? So when you're releasing these projects, you talked about it not being this big reveal or this big kind of, surprise to the client. Can you talk a little bit about, is that happening page at a time? How are you involving the client deeply through this design process, kind of to make sure you're hitting all those goals along the way?
The way that we do it is once we're finished with the homepage, we'll share the staging link out. And at the end of each day, we'll send a Loom video and just give them an update where we're at, let them know they can always check it on their own devices. And that's kind of how we keep them updated, and then we go page by page from there.
And then the second part of that, with how we keep the client or our partners engaged in the process and up to date so that they don't need the grand reveal. It's just over communication. I mean, talk to them like they're people. Don't talk to them like they're, your boss or someone that, just needs to be briefly talked to. Treat them like people, be empathetic, and explain things in a way that anybody can understand it. Technological jargon doesn't go so far when you're working with people that don't live in that space. So daily communication, we use Slack for that. We also use end of day Loom, which is basically just like a quick recap of everything that we did on that day. So if we're in the wireframe stages, we'll run through a few of the wireframes, and then we're specific. We're like, use Figma to drop comments on sections where you have questions, or if you need to discuss things when we meet tomorrow on our check-in call. And that just kind of like, rather than taking all this information and just laying it on the client on the spot, they have time to digest, think clearly, and come prepared with actual like feedback and notes. I mean, you're cutting out like 75% of any issue you have getting a design approved and moved on by doing those things, because they don't work a full-time job to provide feedback for you. They have their own jobs and duties that they're doing, and this allows them to pick the time and place where they can get in that headspace and provide clear feedback to you in that capacity. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, I like also the point of, oh, shit, I just lost it.
But it was a good point, though.
I like it.
I like that point too.
of giving them time to think. Right, so watching the video, a lot of times, like if you're reviewing a design and like you're doing it live on a Zoom call or something, and then you're expecting like the feedback right there, it's like putting them on the spot. So I like the idea of them having that Loom, take some time to think, and then bring the notes to the table. That's like a really key takeaway right there.
Yeah, and I think when we try to get feedback from people, we like to do it in places we know that they're kind of living and communicating, as opposed to, so we like to get feedback through on calls, obviously, or responses to the Loom videos in Slack, where we know they're living in our Slack for the time that we're working with them, as opposed to using a tool. I think a popular one is like Pedal, where you can send out your website and they can make comments on it. And I don't want them to, when I reply to their comment, get an email and then have to open up that web browser. Like, I want them to be living in one space where we're always constantly communicating, as opposed to just adding another layer to them.
Nice. Okay, I've got a question from Tyler here.
Sort of related to some of the things you're already talking about, but how do you work in your process, or how do you tackle in a data-driven world where it's about results and, oh, this worked before, or this works and this works? How do you keep a hold of those qualitative human qualities, things that might not pay off immediately but will pay off, and you just can't say here it is and why?
I mean, this is where we're getting into kind of the division of design, and I think that's more of like where product designers excel, is they're built to understand the data that's come before, to be able to look at the insights that the clients provide before the project starts, to be able to help diagnose even further than just like what they need to be doing is selling products, but like, why aren't they currently? And that's where the product designers can really start to excel. And there's kind of like, everybody has a different description for what a product designer is, a web designer. I don't know, like, there's probably going to be something different, like principal designer, designer. But specifically, product designers focus on more heavily the UX factor and less on the UI factor, at least for Unfold. It may be different. I mean, you may be a product designer out there that does both marketing and web and UX, and that's perfectly fine. Call yourself whatever you want. But to get back to that point, what was it again? I just lost it.
Just how to pull the human elements and not just be totally data driven,
Right.
but having faith or belief maybe that something will work, but it's not popular today. So, I guess that related to that.
Yeah.
Like chasing trends, I guess, because it's working and companies who want that.
Yeah, no, okay. I remember what I was trying to get to there. Fail. Like, I'm serious. I know we're not all in a particular situation to be able to afford that. If you're a new business or you're a freelancer, it makes it extremely difficult to be in a situation in which you need to fail. And that's not to say that you do it intentionally, but you gotta try. You have to, like if I didn't fail, I wouldn't be on this stage right now talking to you about the experiences that I've had. I probably failed more than most people in this room, and that's kind of my stubborn nature and why I'm here. But not just the failure aspect of executing on design, but also given you have access to tools to be able to see once the site's live and you have like a retainer with the client. That's where that product design that I was talking about earlier is like able to diagnose, look at the data, re-implement, change the color of the button, work with a content strategist to come up with a new solution to speak to the users. I mean, you have to start to identify why a page is bouncing, or is that page necessary? Those are the types of things that only happen over time. Rarely do we ever nail it on the first go around. And that's kind of the beauty of web, is just because we designed it and launched with it doesn't mean it needs to stay that way.
I think like sometimes you need to be proactive and sometimes you need to be reactive. And like when we collaborate with the growth team at Webflow, sometimes we're running experiments, and sometimes the champion of the experiment, let's say like an A/B testing, is not the one that I prefer. And then I'm thinking like, how much are we actually relying on this? How much are we like designing for data? Because if not, like if you think about data, like there starts to be like a recipe for conversion. You got like all these like SEO tips, like all this like theory about like above the fold, what needs to be there, and it almost like limits design in a way, And we have this challenge of like, is data going to define design? Is design going to define data, or is it kind of like this like sort of like dance that it goes back and forth? And especially if again I design for designers, so we have had a couple of cases where we have designed things where if performance is a little bit below like what it used to be, sometimes we just still go with that because the visual impact and like the approach that we took. It's just like it kind of like makes it worth it, So if we, for example, in our homepage, we have like this sort of like interaction of like these like a couple clients and a couple like UI kind of like panels pop up. Maybe it would convert more if you go like straight to the content and not show that part. And of course, if that would have meant that conversion was like cut in half, then of course we need to be reactive. But by being proactive and just like offering a solution and testing it a little bit, it just like that gives us kind of like the right, almost like peace of mind that like this is the best approach. It has been tested, and there's no like major like crash, and still we're still able to kind of like honor design and kind of like treat designers, I guess, with the stuff we do.
I want to riff on that just for a second, because we got a cool comment from Zach here saying, does the best music have the most plays? Does the best movie have the biggest box office? Maybe, sometimes, not always. Some design converts, some design is for impact. And I wonder if the size of the organization matters, or what the goals are, or where you are in the trajectory. Because I think back to like a movie like Office Space, where when that movie came out, it literally was a dud. Total dud. Nobody watched it in theaters. And then a few years later, now it's like this cult classic and everybody knows about this thing. And so music, that happens sometimes too, right? Where it'll be something that kind of comes out into the world and maybe it doesn't hit its day, but then, a little bit later, somebody finds it, right? And then, right? And so does it matter if you're, and maybe this is what Tyler was getting after, if you're earlier in your career, are you taking bigger risk? Are you following your gut more because maybe you don't have that data and you have to rely a little bit on that intuition of what is a good design? You have to take a little bit of a risk to do something that maybe doesn't fall in line to be the next trendsetter or to start the next thing. And how do you weigh the balance between those things? Right? Is it the scale and size? Like, because if you're a big enterprise like Webflow, you guys got all sorts of tools that give you data and conversion and blah, 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 blah. But maybe somebody here who's a smaller agency doesn't have those resources or those tools, and so how do they make those same decisions? Is it a gut check? Like, where do you then find parameters within, to operate?
You guys keep leaving these ones to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I don't know if I'm going to answer the question, but I will at least make a comment on it. I do feel like it also comes down to your client's risk tolerance. So just as one example, like the Web3 space, it all looks the same, I feel like. But if they really want to stand out and you come up with 3 different stylescapes, one is completely different, but they are just absolutely no, you can't go that direction unless you have really convincing skills and you put that risk back on yourself as an agency. So yeah, I don't know. That's a tough question. That's a good one.
But I'm kind of riffing off of that. Maybe like not specifically related, but something that I like about what's happening with Web3 is that a couple of the patterns are being broken. A couple of the design styles are being kind of like almost like taken back to maybe like what it was. Like if you think about Dronies, if you think about like Vacation Inc., they have probably one of the like the nicest style that I think that any other NFT has there. They made this sort of like minting experience where everything looks like a computer from the 90s. Very tactile, it's almost like, there's no like, flat button. It's like all like extruded and it feels like you're actually like pressing on a keyboard when you're minting that. And, are you thinking about conversion? Are you thinking about, like the laws of UX or is it just like a delightful experience? And I think like at the end of the day, you need to think about that, like provide a delightful experience for your audience. And I think that Web3 is kind of like, going, almost like going back a little bit on how design used to be, like more tactile, more like relatable to people.
I want to follow up on that because it carries perfectly, and then we can close on this last little round. I get your all thoughts on this. So talking about that unique user experience and kind of seeing what we're seeing, right? And I think Webflow is powering part of that because we saw as the web exploded and people figured out how to get online, it was all WordPress, right? And then next thing you know, these themes come out, these template comes out, and they're all kind of living inside of a framework that has to be a certain way. And so now the whole web looks the same. Hero section with 3 columns with this little thing and blah, blah, blah. Like every website is just this thing. And now what you're talking about and some of those experiences, I think to, like just some of the things you see come out in this Webflow space where it's like, it's an adventure. And sure, maybe the menu's familiar and there's pieces that allow me to get around, but it's like design is coming back to the web, right? The web was supposed to be this open medium that allowed people to create and build interesting experiences for people. And then somehow, because it was easy and because of the technical complexity, we were like, okay, let's all make it look the same because templates. So are we seeing, like you're saying, a resurgence in that? And is that part of what's coming? Is there a Web 2.5 before we get to Web 3 where there's like this thing that's happening right now? And I'd be interested to just to see your takes as how that evolves. Like, were we seeing these kitschy experiences again where you can maybe experiment a little bit more and people are open to like this adventure, like where maybe I gotta go explore some little nuggets or I find a little Easter egg in these sites, and that becomes part of that connection where like, damn, this is cool, this is different. And I think that then helps the conversion or that helps the stickiness or that helps take the next step in that design. So how do you see that evolving? And we'll just close on this thoughts. I'd like to just go straight down the line here. So
this might be like too broad. Webflow kind of publishes this like blog post of like the trends for next year in design. And one of the things that I was able to answer last year was, and this, again, I don't know anything, take it with a grain of salt. I feel like pandemic and how that disconnected people in a way brought a lot of this almost like tangible design to web. Whether it is 3D, whether it is re-exploring like skeuomorphism or claymorphism or glassmorphism, even like dronies with sort of like all these textures, all these like grungy things. Like it's almost like people want to start to feel again. Yeah. And this again with this like minting experience where it's almost like you're actually touching a computer inside of your computer to mint. You had all these like micro trends of like flat design, and then boom, in 2 years, like all sites are flat, and then there's a new style, and then all websites just like kind of like go to the same way. And in a way, it's sort of like like Renaissance or modernism or surrealism that were like almost like art periods through history. And now with all this being digital, it's like trends are like this, and it's so easy to fall on a trend and design on a trend. And then trends change, and then you need to rebrand and kind of like start to design again. And I feel like again going back to Web3. Web3 is kind of like more about the experience and not about like being on a trend or just like being on a like I don't know, like trying to be a part of a niche. So I think that there's a lot about like. And I'm sorry to be repetitive, but about like creating experiences, delightful experiences, and I feel like we're going back to that.
Yeah, it's almost like we're getting away from this like expected notion of what a website should be. And what's been fun about kind of operating within the Web3 space, we say that Web3 for a Web2 site is what we're creating. Because we won't get into that conversation. I still don't even fully understand the full breadth of Web3, but we create sites for these Web3 brands, and Dronies in particular, the whole idea and concept behind it wasn't to create some website that people were going to like put on award sites and like say like, wow, this user experience is incredible. Like what we wanted to create was like an interactive experience that like over time we had built a community that had grown to love our brand and this kind of story that we created along with it. And we used the website as a way to tell that story and like to like put little Easter eggs in there and see what people found along the way. And that's kind of like the fun thing that came out of it was like, man, we're not just doing like an e-commerce site. Like it's not expected. There's no rules. We're kind of doing what we want to do. And it was led by the two designers that are on the web team, and like I remember when Benton originally showed me a concept, I was like, man, I don't know. Subjectively, I was like, I don't really like it, but the MO has always been, hey man, go make something weird, and then let's take a look at it. And he made something weird, and next thing you know, it kind of got polished, got refined, and he sold me. So that's where Joni's ended up.
Yeah, I don't know if this adds on to exactly what you're saying of hoping that experiences are going to be leaned on more, but and this also might be a little bit controversial, but I feel like every website I go to nowadays, there's just an interaction, there's something moving, there's too much going on, and I feel like people are doing animation for animation's sake as opposed to building the experience that they're doing or making the user feel some type of way kind of thing. And like maybe one example would be you have an agency website and their brand color is this bright red. And I would go to their website and, on hover, it would be that classic Webflow 0.5 ease in, ease out. And that doesn't match like what their wording is like fun and playful. And I want that hover interaction to not be like a 1 second ease in, ease out. I want it to be punchy. Like that's what matches their feeling of their brand. So I hope that if there is a 2.5, it's less animation, but more meaningful animation as part of the site. Because I'm really tired of things just fading up every section I scroll down. I don't know about you guys. I'm getting tired of it.
Melissa, you know any final thoughts on that? No. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, we are right at 1 o'clock. So I want to thank everyone on the panel for joining us. Can we give them a round of applause? Yeah. This was an excellent conversation. Honestly, I think we could probably go for another half hour, and we'd probably, enjoy all that. But there is some delicious barbecue sitting on the edge here, and we're gonna break for lunch for about an hour. We'll get back into breakouts and different things. So yeah, stretch your legs, enjoy yourself, enjoy some food, and we'll catch y'all back in a bit.